Yeah, she's got some nice long hair.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and you can follow me at the Draft Bard, and welcome into another episode of the Unbearable Sports Podcast. So make sure to also follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, follow us anywhere you can find us, TikTok, just search for Unbearable Sports. You can also go out to other places like YouTube and find us out there as well. But we have a very exciting show today. We're going to be breaking down the 2021 draft class for the Chicago Bears and regrading it. We're going to kind of go back to what was the original grades, what were people talking about, what were they thinking about with this draft class, and now that it's been a year, let's go into it. But also, I want to kind of bring this up too, because there's already people that are calling for Justin Fields' head. Like, I don't know if anyone else has seen these headlines. They're just crazy. People are already saying that Justin Fields, the next GM, the next head coach, has to trade him. And we'll be going through that plenty, just to kind of talk about how this could potentially be absolutely crazy. Now, also, of you might be watching on Tiki Live. Just a reminder, make sure to download the Tiki Live app. It can be on your phone, it can be on your Roku, it can be on your smart TV, and then you're able to watch us live on your television. Just look for the Belly Up Sports channel, and you'll be able to watch us live on any sort of these podcasts. So let's actually, before we get into the draft picks, let's actually get started with some news. So to start this off, there was actually a lot of news that was going around the Chicago Bears. One of them was that Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts, is actually going to get a second round of interviews. Now, this is pretty noteworthy because no one else has gotten a second round of interviews. And here is Matt Eberflus going to the second round. Now, this actually is pretty interesting because obviously it seems like they really like Eberflus and they like what he has to offer. Personally, I'm not a huge fan. I think that he's solid, but he's never been an amazing defensive coordinator. And you always hear about Frank Reich being more of that leader for the Indianapolis Colts, more so than an Eberflus. So what I'm kind of looking for is, well, where's Brian Flores? Where's Fat Nagy? Where's Brian Dabel? Where is he at? Because those guys, even though I like to call him Fat Nagy, it's still like he's a legitimate guy that you really want to see out there. But we only have Eberflus that's going to the second round. It's really interesting, but hopefully they'll have other people that will be going to that second round. Maybe Dabel isn't out there for the second round because he's got to prepare for the next round of the playoffs. So that could be something that he has to look out for because his team is really, really good. But speaking of the Colts, one Colts GM candidate is no longer a part of the search, and that is Ed Dodds, their GM candidate that the Bears brought in. And at first, he actually said that he pulled himself out of the running for the Bears job. Now, when I first heard this, I was a little bit like, okay, Bears, what are you doing? The Bears are just such a crap show that nobody wants to be a part of this team. And I'm like, we couldn't even get Ed Dodds because supposedly he's one of these top tier candidates that has gotten multiple offers to be a GM and actually has turned down a lot of different GM candidates and different GM spots. But Ed Dodds, supposedly, according to the Bears blog, Ed Dodds, I guess, was late to the meeting. He was using a lot of profanity. It just wasn't a good interview. And that sounds like that's what's been happening is Dodds, when he's been going out to these interviews, just has not been crushing it, has not been doing a good job, not been showing who he is. And especially with the GM job, we've talked a little bit about this. If you're a GM or interviewing to be a GM, you have to be really, really good, because head coaches, you can see it out on the field. You can see if someone's a leader. While with this, it's just like a normal job interview. You have to talk about what you did, what decisions you made, and how you make this organization better. So, sounds like he's just not interviewing well. Made me feel a little bit better hearing that there was a lot of other things that Dodds did wrong rather than the McCaskies, because that's where I jumped to, is that how did the McCaskies screw this up? But it looks like it was more on Dodds' side. Now, we have a lot more items as well. Sean Desai interviewed for the Seattle defensive coordinator job. When I first hear this, I kind of get a little frustrated, like he's already looking to be leaving. But it's honestly a smart decision for him, because if I'm him, I don't know if I have a future with the Bears, because I don't know what my head coach is. And selfishly, as a Bears fan, I'm kind of excited a little bit when I hear this, because if Sean Desai leaves, it gives us a chance at Vic Fangio. Not saying we'll 100% get him, but it at least gives you a shot. And obviously, if you don't get Fangio and you don't have Desai, it absolutely just kind of ruins everything and you come up with nothing. So we'll see what happens there with Sean Desai. You even heard that Chris Tabor was interviewing for a special teams coordinator job with the Panthers. A lot of people are packing up their stuff, but Tabor and Desai seem to be the safest. But Bill Lazor hasn't been talking with anyone as far as I know. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more too about about Brian Flores. My guy, the guy that I want to see the Bears get. Brian Flores is the guy I'm excited about. What's happening with him? Why does he not have a second interview? But what it sounds like is that Brian Flores might want a little bit more power than just the head coaching job. The rumor is that he's kind of coming in and wants a little bit of personnel control, similar to Bill Belichick, where Belichick makes a lot of personnel decisions. Flores wants the same power, or similar power to some extent. Now, this might scare a lot of people off, like the Bears. But one thing that I do want to just call out with this is that with Flores, he might be able to pair with someone like a Rick Smith. Rick Smith was someone that we never really talked about when we were talking about GMs and head coaches. We kind of cut the GM search and GM talk a little short. But Rick Smith is someone who's actually kind of coming up my board on people that I really like. Rick Smith was the former GM of the Texans, and his record as the GM was about 500. They had a really bad year his last year, and then ultimately he ended up resigning. The reason why he resigned was not because of performance, it was because his wife had breast cancer. And unfortunately, she passed away. And then he never took a job after that. And the reason is because he had to take care of his 3 kids. Just a really hard story to hear. But now he feels like he's all ready to come back and start being a GM again. Now, he was a GM from 2006 all the way to 2017. So a huge amount of experience, but also was the VP of football operations from 2012 to 2017. And the reason why that's so important is because if he's the VP from 2012 to 2017, there's a good chance that, like, just to think about this, what if he came in and he was then that football VP, that person in charge of all football operations, and then you have someone like a Brian Flores or someone like a Jim Harbaugh that comes in and they want more control over the personnel decisions, and they can have more control over that, while Rick Smith is more on the football operations side of things, while someone like a Flores and Jim Harbaugh are then kind of taking more control over some of the team. So, or some of the personnel decisions. So it's just something to look out for, because it could be a really good pairing, because Rick Smith could definitely handle more of the football operations rather than the actual personnel people. So just something to be on the lookout for. But the last bit of news, speaking of Harbaugh, is that David Kaplan has reported that he has heard that the Chicago Bears have reached out to Jim Harbaugh. It is something that we got to be looking out for. Hopefully he can come in and actually get a job with us or an interview. That's what we're hoping for. But what's nice is they've at least reached out to him. That's all that we're asking for. And it seems like they've at least done that. So they've reached out to him, and hopefully he can come in to an interview. but we'll make sure to keep you posted on all that news. But that's about it. That's all the news for you right now. We're already 10 minutes in, and we had a whole bunch of news. So let's get into these draft picks. Let's get into the 2021 draft recap. So let's start things off with just kind of remembering who they drafted. And honestly, this was a really good draft class. So what they did is they originally had the 20th pick in the first round. Now, a lot of us, we were projecting Tevin Jenkins, Kadarius Toney. We were hoping to get those, but then the Bears traded up and got Justin Fields, as we all know. So they got Justin Fields with the first pick. Then they traded back in higher in the second round and got Tevin Jenkins. Then they, in the fifth round, they got Larry Borem, our offensive tackle, Khalil Herbert in the sixth, followed by Dazz Newsome in the sixth, and Thomas Graham Jr. in the sixth. And last but not least, they got Kairis Tonga in the seventh round. Now, when you look at this, you got Fields, Jenkins, Borem, Khalil Herbert, Dazz Newsome, Thomas Graham, and Kairis Tonga. That's an incredible draft haul. Now, before we get into how they actually performed, I want to get into what people thought of that draft class before this all happened. Now, I don't have his name is Rene Berger, and he actually put together a big kind of just like an overall GPA of every single draft class. What he did is he just kind of pulled all the draft grades, put them together, and then kind of averaged out the GPA. Now, the Chicago Bears had the number one, the highest draft grade out of everyone else when they had this draft. Their overall draft grade was a 3.99, practically a 4.0. The only one that was kind of close was the Cleveland Browns at 3.89. So the Bears, number one draft class across the board. This is what a lot of people thought. The only people that didn't have them as an A were Mel Kiper Jr., who gave them a B+, and Ryan Dunleavy from the New York Post, that also gave them a B+. Everyone else, I'm looking at NBC Sports, it's an A+. I'm looking at the Draft Wire, it's an A. I'm looking at other like PFF, A's. There's a lot of A grades that are out there. A's, A+, pluses, A minuses. Now, why is that? The reason why a lot of people gave them very high draft grades was if you're just looking at this, you get a generational talent in Justin Fields. So when people see a generational quarterback, they're going to give you an A grade. Now, the reason why I say the word generational is I just want to throw this out here that Justin Fields would be hands down the number one pick of this year's draft class if he was coming out. That's not a hot take. That's just the truth. The amount of production that he put on tape going against the top tier competition, and also you just see the arm strength, you see the leadership, you see the mobility. He shows everything. He checks all the boxes, and it was always him and Trevor Lawrence. And I always point back to PFF said he was a top 5 recruit of all time since their grading. Their grading kind of goes back, I think, to like 2010. But still, you're talking about Andrew Luck, Justin Fields. I think they liked Baker Mayfield, which hasn't turned out, and also Trevor Lawrence. So really, he's that top tier talent, and they were able to get him. But now as you go further down, you have Tevin Jenkins, who is a first round talent that you get in the second round. And then when you go later on, Larry Borem was someone that some people, they weren't that high on, but some people really liked him. And so that was the only pick some people were so on. But then you go down to Khalil Herbert, Dazz Newsome, Thomas Graham, Kairis Tonga. Across the board, everybody liked them better than when they got selected. For some reason, they fell, and the Bears were able to pick them up. And when you're looking at this, that's why universally this was seen as such a successful draft class because of the top end talent that they were able to get, but then also why people love it, draft experts, was all the people they were able to pick up later on in the draft. So let's actually go through this now, because obviously everybody loved it. But what about now? What do we think of this draft class now? What we're going to do is we're going to talk through just how they've been able to perform. And then also what we're going to talk through too is not only just how they performed this year, but also talk about who could have they gotten. Was it the right pick? Because there's a lot of different things that they could have done, especially early on, and especially when they started trading some of these draft picks. So let's start things off with, you guessed it, Justin Fields. So Justin Fields obviously came in hot draft prospect. He had the feet, he had the arm, he had everything that you needed. But then for some reason, he started dropping. Now, what the Bears did was they traded up for Justin Fields. So I'm typically not a fan of trading up. Now, a big reason is because you'll see this later on when we start breaking down the Tevin Jenkins pick. When you trade up, a lot of times you're trading away other draft assets, and it's a lottery. I love predicting the draft, but it's hard to predict who's going to be good. It's really a crapshoot because someone could get injured, someone couldn't look good in a scheme or something like that. There's a lot of different variables that go into someone and how they play. A perfect example of this is think about free agency. Sometimes when you sign free agents, it's not a surefire thing. You literally see them in the NFL and you don't know if they're going to be good in the NFL. That's just the way it goes. It's a very difficult business and it's difficult to know how someone does. Now, Justin Fields, if I'm looking at the stats right now, he put up on average about 190 yards a game. Not that great. He had about 1,800 or close to 1,900 passing yards, a completion percentage of only 58.9. He had 7 touchdowns and 10 interceptions and was sacked a total of 36 times. QB rating of 73, so not that great, but when you're talking about him running the football, he ran for a total of 420 yards, averaged 5.8 rushing yards, and had 2 touchdowns. Now, overall, I think that this is still the proper pick. I think what with Justin Fields, what we saw was we saw the arm talent. We saw what he's capable of. But overall, this offense was just abysmal. He's never been on a team this bad. And I think you could see that. You saw sometimes he started kind of giving up. Not completely, but you kind of saw he was getting hit again. And he's like, okay, I'm going to get hit. I'm not going to get flagged for this like I normally do. But I'm getting no flags. I'm getting no protection. Everything kind of stinks. Everything kind of sucks. So I don't blame him too much for not a terrible, just a bad rookie season. But also, I think when you're looking at his interception numbers, they look a lot worse than what actually happened. We all know this. There was probably only like 2 or 3 that were really his fault. He had one batted at the line that fell right into a defender's hands. He threw one deep because Matt Nagy said there was 12 men on the field. Packers jumped off sides. He bombed it deep. And what do you know? There's a guy there to intercept the ball. There's also been a lot of his interceptions where the wide receivers just weren't making good plays. Cole Kmet grabs the ball, drops it right into the defender's hands. There's a lot of things that just weren't his fault. And I think eventually, when we get a good head coach in, when we get a good offensive scheme, I really think he's going to vibe and do a lot better. I think, too, especially he needs to get the rhythm down with his wide receivers. You saw that all the time. It seemed like he wasn't missing his guys. It seemed like they were off. I don't think I had the bear goggles on to say that, hey, he doesn't miss. He just is off with his receivers. But you could really kind of feel it when he would throw something. It's one of those, hey, that guy was supposed to go a little bit deeper, or they kind of missed the timing on that route. What's nice is Fields and Mooney are already working together. So I'm hoping that he's going to be able to kind of mend things and be a lot better next year. I still think it was the right choice. I still stand by the trading up as well, because you need to get a quarterback and you need to get the guy. And when, like I said, a generational prospect comes around, you have to get him. Now, for people that are saying, well, what about Mac Jones? We needed Mac Jones. Mac Jones has been better. Now, I think Mac Jones has had the best rookie year out of all of them, but I still wouldn't want to have Mac Jones as my quarterback. I still would rather have Justin Fields because I think his ceiling is much, much higher. I think that with him, he can really kind of take you to the promised land and be that next great quarterback. and I stand by it. To me, this is still the right pick, the right reason to trade up, and that's what you do. Now, I just want to look at what would have happened if we would have just sat there at 20. Obviously, certain things would have changed, would have shifted, but really at that 20 spot, Kadarius Toney was drafted. Now, Kadarius Toney was a solid wide receiver, but around that, you had Kwity Paye, who was solid for the Colts, Caleb Farley, who wasn't that good for the Titans this year, and Christian Darrisaw, who a lot of Bears fans were hoping that we would have drafted. It was either Darrisaw or Jenkins. Darrisaw had a pretty good rookie year when he was healthy, when he was out there at offensive tackle. But really, it was hard. Greg Newsome was another guy we wanted. He was a solid corner as well. But really, when I'm looking at this, we didn't have to give up that many draft picks. We just had to give up our next first round draft pick, a fifth, and a fourth. That's not that bad for a potential generational quarterback, our future franchise quarterback. That is well worth it. So to me, that pick is still an A pick. I still would not change it for the world. I still love that we got Justin Fields, no matter what it was. And for some people that might be saying, well, what if we traded up and got Micah Parsons? Because Micah Parsons went with the very next pick. To me, even though that he had a beast of a season, you got to go quarterback. You have to change that. You got to get someone different. And that's why I still stand with Justin Fields. But that's enough on Fields. Right pick. We'll move on to Tevin Jenkins. Tevin Jenkins was picked with the 7th pick in the 2nd round. The Bears traded up, and the trade was basically they traded their 52nd pick, the 52nd pick in the draft, which was the 20th pick in the 2nd round, and they traded their 3rd round and their 6th round. And what they ended up getting was they got a 5th round draft pick back from the Panthers, which ended up being Larry Borem, and they got back the 2nd round pick. Now, honestly, I'm not a big fan of trading up, like I've mentioned, but this wasn't a terrible trade. The only thing that's a little bit iffy is that you traded a 2nd and a 3rd. We'll go through that and just kind of talk about some of the people that they could have gotten. And you can kind of think about, who would I have rather them get? Now, this is a lot of hypotheticals, because they could have taken someone that you're like, who? Why did we get them? And it was just a terrible pick. But really, same thing, same concept. You got a 1st round talent in the 2nd round. So the argument is that you got a 5th round pick back. So technically you're moving up from the 6th round to the 5th round. And then you're really just kind of trading your 2nd and 3rd for just slightly better position in the 5th. And also you end up, moving up and getting your guy. Now, I think that even though that we haven't seen Tevin Jenkins a lot, I still think it's a relatively smart move. I don't hate it as much as the other trade ups that Ryan Pace has done. I thought this was solid. This was a good amount of trade value for a good player. Now, we didn't see him a lot because of his back injury, but what's good is when Blake was talking about it before, he was talking about the back injury, that after they removed everything, it is done. Now, that's the biggest thing, is when people hear back injury, they go, oh boy, this is Chris Williams again. This is a name that we haven't heard of in a long time, but Chris Williams had that back issue. He just wasn't the same. He wasn't that 1st round talent. Tevin Jenkins, he had a different back issue. Now it should be cleared up. Now he kind of needs that mini camp. And to me, I think that it was the solid pick. It was still kind of the right thing to do. Even though, like I said, not a fan of the whole trade up. But I just want to kind of walk through who they could have gotten, because this is just a good exercise to kind of talk about why trading up can also be a little bit detrimental. So I'm just pulling up the draft class, like what they could have gotten in that 2nd round. Now, right before their pick, Sam Cosmi out of Texas was selected, and honestly has played very well for the Washington football team. Obviously, they wouldn't have gotten him because it was one pick right before him. But do you know who went at that pick for the Bears? It was Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker out of Notre Dame. Imagine if we would have had him, because he was someone that was dropping. A lot of people had him in the 1st round because of his speed, but a lot of people had him dropping because of his size. That's kind of the trade-off that he had. He had a phenomenal year, and that is someone that we could have gotten. Other people that were kind of up there. Dylan Radins, the offensive tackle out of North Dakota State, not a good rookie year. Pat Fryermuth, tight end. Would we have gotten him? Most likely not. But then linebackers, it was really that inside linebacker in that second round that we could have gotten. Nick Bolton, Owusu Koamoa, Pete Werner. These were all linebackers that were supposed to kind of go in that second that ultimately went. Think about what if we would have had one of those players, or what if we drafted Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma that played more. He ended up playing a little bit of a, actually, no, he was playing center for the Kansas City Chiefs and has been the best center in the league. Just think about that. That's why when you're talking about the trading up, there's a handful of people that you can still get and still strike on. Now, obviously, this is a lot of hypotheticals. This is, well, they would have had to draft the proper person because chances are they might have went with Radins. And now we're saying, this guy's not really good, rather than, hey, this guy could be a lot better later on. Now, I just want to also just drop down to the third round as well, just to kind of see who else they could have potentially gotten. Now, down in the third round, there really wasn't a lot of talent. So kind of trading up was kind of good. But at that Bears pick, the Panthers selected Tommy Tremble, who was just a solid tight end. Other people that went around there, Kendrick Green, center out of Illinois, went to the Steelers, didn't have that great of a year. Wyatt Davis went to the Vikings, never saw the field. He was someone that I liked, but he just was not able to see the field. Anthony Schwartz, Cleveland Browns, didn't see the field too much, but just this very solid player. Another person who I really liked, who I kind of wish that the Bears would have gotten, was the Denver Broncos' Quinn Meinertz. He had a solid rookie season. He is someone that came from my alma mater, Wisconsin Whitewater. And he was someone that I just wanted the Bears to get. Didn't do that great. All right, it did do very well, but that's yet again hypotheticals. Elijah Molden out of Washington. He was someone that was a big slot corner. What I'm trying to get at is that there's still talent in the second and third rounds. This isn't like, oh, well, they would have had to select them and they would have had to known to select them. These were all players that were pretty high up on the draft boards that people were saying should have gone in those types of areas. So just something to think about. Who would you have rather had? Would you have rather had Tevin Jenkins, or would you have rather had Elijah Molden, or maybe Ben Cleveland, who hasn't done great, Quinn Meinertz, and go back up to the second round and maybe JOK out of Cleveland? Think about that. Think about Nick Bolton. Think about those linebackers. It's just it's just a fun exercise. We could have had a really good center, and we could have had potentially a linebacker or a slot corner. Obviously, it's hypotheticals, but that's the reason why having more draft picks, you have more tickets, more people that you can hit on. We'll still see what Tevin Jenkins goes, but I still kind of like the move of still moving up. But let's move on. We won't do as many of those exercises now because it's a little bit hard later on in the draft, because this is really where you want to have more tickets. You want to have more people that you can attempt to try and hit on, because there's just there's so much randomness to this, because this is where you're just starting to say, all right, who's good value? And also, who do we really like? Now, out of that Tevin Jenkins trade, we did get back into the fifth round. Another reason why I kind of did like that trade up. And we got Larry Borem. Like I said, not a lot of people love Larry Borem, but he was able to drop a lot of weight because he was big. And what we saw is a solid right tackle. He isn't someone that you're like, oh man, he's the next star right tackle, but he's somebody who came in and has done a very good job. Now, you don't feel like we have to be frantically looking at right tackle or for other tackles out there. So really, to me, this is another huge win. A lot of draft classes, if 50% of them end up playing, it's a win. And right now, your first three picks kind of all played. Tevin Jenkins banged up, and Jason Peters decided to just have a beast of a year. So yeah, That's the reason why he wasn't playing. He was injured, and you signed someone who was a very, very good left tackle. Now, Larry Borem obviously can get better. But in the 5th round, you get someone like this, just seeing the other talent that's around there, it's just there's not a lot of talent, not a lot of big names. So to be able to pick someone like that, very impressive. Very good pick and very good eye for talent. So kudos. But let's just kind of keep on moving forward. So obviously we got back into the 5th round, but this is where I really like this trade. We didn't have a lot of picks. So what did the Bears do? They traded the 208th pick, which was eventually Stone Forsythe, and they ended up getting 2 picks back, which ended up being the 6th rounder and also a 7th rounder. The 6th rounder turned into Khalil Herbert, pick 217. Now, it's plain and simple that this has been a home run of a pick. You drafted Khalil Herbert, and he showed exactly why a lot of draft experts really liked him. He shows the vision. He shows the good contact balance where he's just able to kind of stand up and really kind of get between the tackles. One thing too that I really wasn't expecting someone to learn this quickly in his career, he became a pretty good 3rd down player. It kind of overtook Damian Williams, who Damian Williams is like the guy that you want in on 3rd down, and Khalil Herbert's going out there saying, "I'll block." We saw this when he would be in the backfield with David Montgomery, and Khalil Herbert would be the lead blocker for David Montgomery. That's incredible, especially for a rookie to kind of pick up the playbook to be a lead blocker for your running back. So to me, yet again, another home run pick. And this is someone that during the preseason, I like the strategy of bringing in a running back when you have another running back like a David Montgomery whose contract is going to expire in a couple of years. So next year is his last year potentially with the Bears. You bring in someone and you're able to test them out. If they're good, you don't have to draft another running back. But if they were bad, you can draft another running back and maybe then they're your next running back. So you don't have to pay them. Honestly, I love David Montgomery, but Khalil Herbert looking pretty good right about now. So Khalil Herbert, another just phenomenal pick. We go down to Daz Newsome. Now, Daz Newsome, a lot of people will look at this and say, well, this is probably one of the picks that we're probably not that high on. But honestly, when you're looking at the other wide receivers that were going around the times like this, Daz Newsome actually has a good handful of snaps compared to the other people that win in the 6th. I think that's what a lot of people fail to remember is that in the draft, you normally don't get a lot of starters. That's normally the way it is. It's rare when you're able to get a starter. That's why with Larry Borem starting, it's an accomplishment. It's a very big accomplishment. So with Daz Newsome only kind of coming in a little bit later on, I'm fine with that. I still think it's the right pick. I think that you saw what he's able to do with his quickness and his speed, but also he's starting to understand the playbook. He's going to have a new playbook soon, but he's kind of grasping that playbook and just becoming better and better and better. I'm excited to see what he's got to do for the next year. I think he's going to be a 3rd or 4th wide receiver, hopefully a 4th. I don't think he's all of a sudden going to blossom as a potential starter, but I think I've said this before. I think that he's going to be someone similar to Javon Wims, but I think he's going to have a lot more upside as a special teamer. And I think definitely we saw that towards the end of the year where he's someone that you're like, I love Jakeem Grant, but I don't know if we necessarily have to re-sign him when we have a player like Daz Newsome on the squad. So yet again, phenomenal pick, just kind of everything that we were expecting. That's what we're seeing out of this draft class. Now, next, Thomas Graham Jr. Thomas Graham Jr., need we say more? He was someone that came out with a lot of experience and a very good head on his shoulders. Honestly, it scared me when he was on the practice squad and we weren't seeing him get any play time. It seemed like they never wanted to see him out there. What we started to hear is that Thomas Graham Jr., it seemed like he was very inconsistent in practice. Now, I got to give the coaches some slack. If you're seeing someone that is inconsistent, how are you supposed to have faith in them that they should be the starter? Now, obviously, he's got just that different mentality. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He goes in, he balls out against Minnesota. And to me, this is someone that even if he's not a starter, even if he's not a star, if you have a backup in the 6th round, 228th pick, and he's just the backup. Like, honestly, if he just plays like a Kindle Vildor role and just is that upgrade over Kindle Vildor, that's a success. In the 6th round, give me that all day. And yet again, we're looking at this and we see the types of players that the Bears were able to draft. This is just phenomenal because I want to just pull up another one of the Chicago Bears drafts where with the Chicago Bears draft classes, it's just it hasn't been great. But that's just how normal draft classes are. You only hit on 50% of them. But right now, it's like the Bears just decided we're going to hit on everybody. We have Khalil Herbert, our running back of the future. He averaged over 4 yards a carry, something that David Montgomery has only been able to do once under Matt Nagy. Now it's a lot of blame is on Matt Nagy, but still Khalil Herbert was able to do it. He's not as shifty, he's not as great of an athlete, but he's someone that just gets the yards. And last but not least, a pick that we got from Seattle, Kairis Tonga. There really wasn't a lot of good defensive interior people out of this class. And you have Kairis Tonga, who was day one on this roster and was a contributor as a backup defensive interior player. To me, that's yet again another win. Now, it just seems like a broken record. Win, 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 win. It's unfortunate that Pace gets fired after a draft class like this, but really, I think this just holds true. You're looking at this, overall, and the only thing that I can really kind of knock them for, I thought they crushed it at the end of the draft because you got a lot of good pieces, and you can't really knock that for it because right now, if you had someone slightly rated higher, you can't really fault them because right there it's all horse apiece. But they got good talent late, and then the only thing that you can kind of fault them for is, well, maybe you shouldn't have traded up for Tevin Jenkins. That's my opinion. I don't think that Mac Jones would have made this much better. I think that Justin Fields was still the right pick, and I think that Tevin Jenkins, you can kind of go back and forth. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know on social media. Follow us at Unbearable Sports, and you can let us know all your thoughts. I think overall, though, that this draft class was pretty good. it was a good draft, one of the best that I've seen. So hopefully, whoever takes the reins is able to do something like that. That's what gets me a little bit nervous about Rick Smith, though. To be honest, I was looking back at his draft history, and it really wasn't the best. I don't think that he was kind of known for his drafting. It seemed like he hit on a couple picks, like TJ Watt, like JJ Watt, and all this, and Deshaun Watson, and then they started to kind of take off. So we'll just have to see what ends up happening. Now, what's going to happen throughout this week? So I'm actually going to be out on vacation, but don't worry. I have all my episodes recorded. You'll still get the episodes. So just make sure to stay tuned. But something for us to all look out for is will the Bears actually hire someone this week? My guess is most likely no. And this is one of the times that it seems like there's really no sexy candidate out there. I'm looking at all the different people that we could potentially hire, and still nobody really jumps out because you can always kind of say, but what about this about them? What about this? Because you're looking at Leslie Frazier. Leslie Frazier was a head coach, didn't have a great track record. So you're not going to hire. You don't want to hire someone like that because he was not a great head coach. But has he learned something? The only person that I think is now becoming a sexier and sexier name is Brian Dabel. You saw what the offense was able to do, and they were able to succeed. So to me, he is now the hot name. You have Brian Flores, who seems to want all that control, and you have Dabel, who just wants to be a head coach. But there's still questions on if he's a great leader. but what I'm hearing more and more of. I know Blake was super high on Brian Dabel, and now I'm getting higher and higher on Brian Dabel too, because I'm hearing more reports that he's the type of head coach that will call his players. And it's such a small thing, but just somebody that's just going to really try and connect with his players, talk with them, and make sure that they're okay. And I still go back to when your head coach, if you are an offensive person and you have your offense and you run the offense, that is something that is crazy different than a lot of these other offensive coordinators that are out there. Byron Leftwich, yes, he's kind of running the offense, but not to the scale that Brian Dabel is running the offense. So to me, Leftwich is kind of moving down and Dabel is moving up because of the ability of him to just be able to run and facilitate his own offense, not a Bruce Arians offense, but a Brian Dabel offense. That's the type of stuff that we need out of this team. That's the stuff that we need for Justin Fields. So got to wrap this up, and just to put it all together, every pick to me, Justin Fields, let's not get rid of him. Let's just see what he can do with this team. And we traded up. So honestly, I think that it should be good. Tevin Jenkins, excited to see. Larry Borem, excited to see. Herbert, future RB1. Daz Newsome, got to give him a little bit extra time, but he's going to be a good special teamer for us. Thomas Graham Jr., we want him to start. And Kairis, Tonga, he's a big beast. But the only other thing that I'm just going to add in, besides just that it is an A, I just want to applaud the undrafted free agent signings. Usually a lot of times with undrafted free agents, you see some of these names and you go, why didn't we sign them? But the Bears honestly jumped on one of the biggest ones, which was they jumped on Charles Snowden. They also jumped on Caleb Johnson. Caleb Johnson, future very good special teamer that we have out there that's able to make a lot of these plays. He makes someone like a E.A. Buniwe more expendable. Even though that he's still a good special teamer, it allows you to bring in other talent. So having Caleb Johnson, pretty bright future in the NFL, at least as a special teamer. The Bears brought in Sam Kamara, Tyrone Wheatley Jr. They brought in a couple of these people that just have high upside. So that's why I really like the Charles Snowden. He was someone that could have been drafted a lot higher because of his frame, because of his athleticism, but we were able to get him as an undrafted rookie free agent. Just smart plays, because what's the risk? And honestly, that is someone who I want to track this offseason to see what can he turn into. And if he's not doing anything in the preseason, I'll probably give up a little bit on him, but he is someone that I was just excited to see them at least take a shot on. So that's about it. Make sure to follow us. You can follow me, Brad Barron, at the Draft Bard on Twitter. You can follow Unbearable Sports at Unbearable Sports on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and you can follow us also at Unbearable Sports on Twitter. We'll be keeping you all up to date on what's going on in the NFL and what's going on with this crazy head coaching search. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.